especially want to thank our panelists for taking the time to be here to discuss this very important topic, and understanding that this can be a challenging topic for many, but it's one that we're all working on and hoping to really expand our knowledge and understanding. And very importantly, what steps can we do to take action to really support and build our water sector and our water sector in workforce. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit on who I am as a moderator, and then go in and give each of our panelists an opportunity to kind of introduce themselves and give us their background. Again, Felicia James with Carollo Engineers, the chair of the Inclusion and Diversity Committee. And this is just a very important topic to me to help us understand what we can be doing. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Secretary Crowfoot to introduce themselves and tell us why this topic is important to you as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm Wade Crowfoot, and I lead our California Natural Resources Agency, and we're one of really two state agencies that has a large department within our agency that focuses almost primarily on water, and that is the Department of Water Resources, or DWR. Our sister agency across Sacramento behind me is California Environmental Protection Agency, which hosts the California State Water Resources Control Board, what we know as the Water Board, and the regional boards. And what we've realized, just to cut to the chase, really in the last couple of years, particularly given the reckoning that we've all been involved in, is just the systemic inequity and the institutionalized racism that has existed in the institutions we lead and the set of water systems that provides water to California. I mean, I think we all have to recognize that we inherit institutions that have distributed this precious resource very differently, depending on where you lived and what you looked like and the amount of income that you earned. And that in response, the need is not to simply be neutral and to assure ourselves that we won't make those kind of decisions, but to identify how those decisions manifested in the inequity that we deal with in our systems today, and then proactively address those inequities. So to build broader equitable access to this incredible resource of water. Part of that is recognizing that, speaking for my agency, 21,000 people strong, we have tremendously talented people that have made their careers here, but our workforce does not reflect the state of California. It does not reflect the diversity of the people that we serve. There is so much talent on the sidelines because the way that our systems have worked encourages certain folks, certain communities to be part of our agencies making decisions and excluded others. So we're really on a journey to build the inclusion, the diversity of our workforce, really to bring in that set of perspectives needed to actually truly acknowledge and uncover where there are these inequities to address them. And by diversity, of course, that means racial and ethnic diversity. It means gender balance. It means age. It means life experience. Certainly, we're also recruiting from our tribal communities and working more closely with tribal governments. So I'll lastly say, I'm a learner in this space. And I think we've made some progress, and I'm proud of the progress, and first and foremost, acknowledging and committing to change. But I'm mostly here to listen and learn because I think that's from where I sit, what I need to do and what our agency needs to do.
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And next, Jasmine Hall.
Hello, welcome everyone. I am the president of the Inland Empire Utility Agency, and we seek to fulfill its responsibility as a steward of the region. We're committed to sustainably enhancing the quality of life in the Inland Empire by ensuring that a clean, plentiful water supply is available now and in the future. Over the years, IEUA has taken a variety of responsibilities in order to better assure a sustainable water supply. And this is including becoming a regional provider of wastewater treatment with domestic and industrial disposable systems developing energy producing infrastructures, and taking a leadership role in water and reserving water reserves, water resource management, and maintaining a high quality of community and educational outreach. And the reason why I'm here today is because this topic is as important to me as well. It is important that we bring a diversity to the perspective, to the table. The solutions we need aren't for the far future, but are now more immediate. And we can't continue doing things as we always have to be ready for and to adopt our changing water outlook. This means we are in a position of leadership, and we need to foster an environment where our staff and their input are heard. We can't wait for them to develop tough skins after years of employment until they reach a level of authority in the organization where they are finally heard. Our industry no longer has time to wait for it. We are a patient people, but the realities of the people served and affected by our services can't wait. Think about the children in Flint, Michigan. With the move to One Water, that is the intersection of source water and drinking water and wastewater and stormwater, our solutions creators and decision makers need to reflect all of the communities that are important and impacts them. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Rick Callender.
All right, hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everyone and glad to be participating. So real fast on Valley Water, we represent all of Santa Clara County, the heart of Silicon Valley. At Valley Water, we have a little bit over 900 permanent employees and lots of interns and temps. We manage 10 dams, reservoirs, 3 water treatment plants, and advanced recycled water purification center, a state-of-the-art water quality laboratory, nearly 400 groundwater recharge ponds. So yes, we are all things water for Silicon Valley, but we also provide for flood protection. One of the things that I look at, and and why am I here? Well, I was invited to be here, and so. But when I'm looking at issues of diversity and equity, of course, I want to speak to them. As an African American man that grew up in this industry, I've been working at Valley Water for 25 years. I walk into the room and I don't see people like me. I often talk about going to conferences and conventions, and at certain points, I said, I can't do this anymore. I walk into a conference convention and the first time you're ignored completely is because you're new. The second time is because you're still new. The third time, you're not new anymore. Now you're just don't look like folks. You're not welcome to the table. Often I've been at events where I say, raise your hands if you've been to a Black church before. I grew up in a Black church. So for me, I know the familiarity with the Black church, but walking into a room of professionals that doesn't look like you is like the equivalent of someone else potentially going to a Black church and saying, wow, I don't see anyone here that looks like me. So what's important to me is that we have everybody at the table. When you're trying to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, this is about business sense. This is about how do we make sure that we are working forward, that we're moving forward, and that we're doing it in a way where you'll have different voices, different thoughts at the table. When you have diversity at the table, you will make better decisions. And so for me, that's why it's important. I think this is an important topic. It's not just because of my NAACP background. It's not going to surprise anybody. With all that I've done in the NAACP, I've always been out there talking about civil rights. Yes, this is one of the civil rights movement. Don't let it be. I know Secretary Crowfoot talked about the racial reckoning. Yes, there's a point in time where now people are looking and saying, yes, systematic racism has had their foot on their knee on the neck of other people that look like me. I felt it in my own career. But I'm in the seat now, and I'm in the seat because I stand on the shoulders of so many others that gave me the opportunity to be in the seat. So I owe it to them to let them stand on my shoulders to continue to rise up the ladder. So I look forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be a good one. I think it's going to be exciting.
Thank you so much. I appreciate those words. June Lopez.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with this great panelist and moderator. So a little bit about Molten Miguel Water District. We're a water and wastewater and recycled water provider in South Orange County in California, and we serve 6 cities. At our agency, we take great pride in a saying that we have, which is we're not just in the water business, we are in the people business. And we focus on people in our community, people within our organization, people in our industry. And it's always very important for us to have diversity and perspective. that comes with different backgrounds, different areas, different beliefs. So we have always embraced this idea. And one of our initiatives that we started several years ago was FLOW, Future Leaders of Water. And that was to develop future leadership in water that's going to be better than what we have today, but really talking about how do we go out there and seek out diversity and invite, not just say we're here to be inclusive, but to actually actively invite people and pull people in. So it's been a very exciting time for us. On a personal level, I immigrated to United States when I was 8 years old from South Korea. And back then we didn't have things like ESL, and there weren't any kinds of programs that really invite immigrants like us. So we struggled socially and financially. And just growing up, I always felt like an outsider, many times treated like I didn't belong. And I think that really stayed with me as I got older. And before I got into water, I was a police officer. And right now we're talking a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, but as we all know, it wasn't talked about as broadly and deeply as it is being talked about today. We're long overdue. So as a police officer, you look around, you talk about being male dominated. I'm Asian female, I'm short. I kind of stick out like a sore thumb. And I always knew that diversity was important because in the public service, especially, we have to reflect the people we serve, because I might know what Rick thinks, I might know what Jasmine thinks, but until you are in their shoes, until you lived their life, you do not know. And so I thought it was really important to understand the struggles and the challenges and the opportunities of the people that we served. And so I tried to do initiatives at the police department, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't popular. I got made fun of, ridiculed, put down for doing something like that because the time and the people just weren't ready. And then I come into the water industry, and not that very much different in terms of sort of the statistics that Alex showed us at the very beginning of this sort of pre-panel discussion. And again, long before we're talking about it now, I talked about diversity, the importance of serving disadvantaged community. And there again, you get a lot of arrows because what are you doing? You're not a social engineer, or why are you talking about that? We do pipes, we deliver water. And so I'm really encouraged and just really happy that we're having this conversation. But for me, it's most important that we do something about it. Talking about it is not enough. We have to start doing and taking action to hold ourselves accountable to do the right thing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Jose Martinez.
Yeah, well, first, thank you very much for having me part of this distinguished panel, and welcome everybody here. I don't want to repeat what already has been said because I agree with everything, and double that. But I do want to build on something that Rick had mentioned, which is, the business sense of this, which is, we're all dealing with now what we call the silver tsunami. We have a lot of turnover and vacancies. So we already struggle, I think, in the water industry to get our name out there, to recruit good, talented people. So why would I, limit that talent pool, right? So that's, from a business sense, is the best thing we can do as managers is hire, train, and maintain the best. And the bigger and more talented pool of people we have, we better serve our communities. I work at Untitled Water. We represent the southeastern portion of San Diego County, serving just under 250,000 people. Very diverse group. We have rural areas, we have very urban areas. We serve all the way down to the border, and even have an interconnection with Mexico. So the customers we serve is already a diverse work group, community, and so we want to be able to pull from that talent. And that's why it's so important for us, is we want to maintain those services to the community, have the best talent pool for the years to come. I mean, like I said, we're going to be dealing with a competition for skilled labor. And so the more people we can get with those diverse views, those diverse talents, and the greater we can grow that talent pool, we're really serving ourselves and serving the community. So I want to thank you for having me here.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for all that input and background and sharing your stories. And I think I want to add, before we jump into the questions, in talking about that talent pool and how do we respond to that silver tsunami of these waves of retirements, and bringing in the diversity of perspectives that we'll get from having a diverse talent pool, but then creating an environment where that talent feels confident and enabled to share their thoughts and ideas when Jasmine talked about being, being patient, but also feeling silenced at times. And, we need to, being in a position where you kind of have to wait till you're in a level of authority before your voice is heard. I don't think we have the time anymore in this water industry to let people grow and develop. So just kind of that background. I even remember going to my 20th college anniversary and overhearing a group of students discussing among themselves the challenges they were having in the classroom of being the only one who looked like them, and what that meant when you're trying to form study groups. It was eerie to me because those were the exact same conversations I had with my peers 20 years earlier. So again, we, our water sector is dealing with some very challenging water issues, and we really want to bring the best talent to the table. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our questions here so that everyone can share their ideas. So our first question is, what actions or initiatives has your organization implemented or is implementing to address these concerns we've just been talking about around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for your employees, so internal to your organization, and then external to your stakeholders and customers? And I'd like to give everybody kind of a chance, beginning with Secretary Crowfoot.
Hey, thanks so much. So just to capture the crux of the question, it's really how to advance that message both internally and externally.
Right. Are there specific initiatives that you have within the agency or in your context in helping those who are served in our water sector?
Yeah, great question. So, what I shared as an introduction is really trying to lead and create space to shift our culture and institutionalize the priorities of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And while it's important for leaders to, articulate the importance and create that space, we have to institutionalize it. So we've been working to actually do that. So in answer to that question, we established an initiative across our agency called Thrive at Resources, really focused on three things: employee wellness and community wellness, given COVID over the last 2 years and just the stress that we're all under. The improvement of recruiting and hiring practices, and then external engagement. And most relevant to this conversation is really improving the way that we actually recruit folks into our agency and hire them. And so we've actually established an entity or a working group across our agency. We have between 26 and 30 entities in our agencies, from very large, think CAL FIRE with 9,000 employees, to a conservancy with 3 employees. And we've had very disparate practices as it relates to hiring. So we've got a group together with that priority around improving on DEI to share best practices and start to institutionalize some standards across our agency. And so, for example, traditionally, a lot of departments have relied on the state HR webpage, believe it or not, to notice job openings. Now, unless you are already involved in the state or know somebody involved in the state, it is very unlikely you are actually going to find the kind of diverse talent pool or the size of the talent pool that Jose mentioned if you just have that portal. So now, through that working group, as one example, we're actually expanding our job notices across a broader set of platforms, including direct outreach to industry associations that serve diverse professionals in our field. So the idea is more proactive recruitment, letting more people know. I totally agree that, to date, I think public agencies have really narrowed their talent pool by relying on traditional sources. The other, I could talk a little bit more about what we've done around to recognize implicit bias in the hiring process and some standards we've done. For example, removing names from resumes and even institutions where people were educated in the hiring practice. So again, those are some of the very specific improvements that we're looking to make and then standardize across our agency.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Jasmine, can you share some of the initiatives in your organization as well?
Yes, thank you. IEUA has provided implicit bias training to all the staff, and then we are also reviewing the job descriptions to ensure that they aren't erroneously excluding unrepresented populations. For example, some of the job descriptions that require a driver's license as a condition of employment, we scrutinize those to ensure that the driving is necessary when getting from point A to point B, but may be necessary, but having the employee to drive may not be necessary. So for example, the employees can take an Uber or they can have a family member drive them. So if the job description requires a driver's license and the employee isn't actually required to drive, the employee is potentially excluding persons with disabilities who are otherwise qualified, such as with wheelchairs. So we've also have implemented the first ever remote work policy post-pandemic. And it helps in two fronts. It helps mitigate some of the challenges that underrepresented communities experience as it relates to access and transportation issues. We also enables agency for remote work positions to draw from a broader pool of talent and attract individuals from various communities, not necessarily adjacent to i.e. physical location. We're also reviewing the personnel policies to ensure that they can be applied equitably. All IEUA documents that govern the employment relationships are currently being reviewed to ensure that they are all equitable and inclusive. And if the policies are out of date in such a way that the employer must make exceptions to the policy because the policy no longer works, we run the risk of inadvertently applying the policy in an equitable manner. And then we also use the talent acquisition. With our succession planning efforts, we now have developed an MOU with IE Works, and we're reaching out to unrepresented populations when we're posting job opportunities. And we're reviewing the minimum requirements such as education, experience, and driver's license to ensure that they are all necessary to perform the work required of the position. So those are some of the things that we're doing at IEUA.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Rick?
Yeah, so I'd mentioned that I've been at my organization for 25 years. I was hired as CEO on July 13th of this past year. On September 22nd, what I brought to the board was, actually the first thing I did was create what I called was the READY unit. It was racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. I had created that, actually my first administrative action, and basically announced it to the employees, created 4 positions in there in order to move the organization forward. We had long before had racial equity document, well, not racial equity, diversity and inclusion documents. We never talked about the issues of race. Often people said is, I don't recognize race and we don't see race, we just want diversity and inclusion. So I tell folks, when I walk in the room and you see a 6'2" large African-American man walk in and you don't recognize race, that means you don't recognize me. So one of the things I want to do is make sure first that we are really recognizing the issues around race. So on September 22nd, I brought to our board of directors a addressing systematic racism and promoting equity resolution. In that resolution, I made sure that the board directed the CEO on certain actions, from not only looking at hiring practices, not only looking at how do we address and dismantle some of the systematic policies that are within the organization, but also to figure out how to strengthen outreach, not only into the community and otherwise, looking at putting in place programs that would include diversification of contractors. So I'm looking at the entire organization. What I want to do is make sure that we can provide everybody an equal opportunity. It doesn't matter what area of the organization you're in, but making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity. And I'll make sure that folks can have access to the resolution. But one of the things I wanted to do was make sure that I had the buy-in of my board of directors. They knew what they're getting when they hired me. They knew who I was. My background wasn't any secret and they knew what I stood for. But I wanted to make sure that they provided the CEO the direction of what to do. So that resolution set the platform, set the base, set the floor for where we're going to start from. We're going to continue to build up from that. The second thing I did is I did a basically an equity survey to figure out and to say, well, where are we? What does it look like? Yes, again, we'd had we basically had plans that were in place, but plans are the best thing to put on the table and say, yes, we have them if you're not implementing them. So we did an assessment, and then we're going to utilize that to put in place a real work plan that's going to work for this organization, that's going to make changes in this organization, and that's going to basically show folks the reality of what you can do and why it's better if you have racial equity, diversity, and inclusion within an organization. So that's what my organization has done, at least under me. We're still on the path, we're still building. We can still do better, but the board has my commitment to better, but even more so, I have my board's commitment to direct me to do better.
That's so very important, and I appreciate you sharing. June Lopez?
Sure. Talk a little bit more about our flow initiative. So the idea was to partner with very different sectors, not just the academic institutions, which we have, UC Irvine, Santiago Canyon College, really looking to develop programs to pull people into our industry, not just to our agency, and really trying to figure out how do we create an integrated learning environment so that an engineer, an artist, whatever their discipline, they understand how their particular area affects another. And I would say in water, there's a place for everyone, and really going out there and actively marketing and promoting the opportunities that are in water, because a lot of times people don't think about it. Water is sort of the forgotten element. It doesn't stand out. So people don't see sort of all this variety of jobs and opportunities and or potential to earn benefits, all these things that are important to a lot of people. But we also find that purpose is really important to the next generation. Working with a lot of these academic institutions is defining a purpose. So when you go to our website and you go to our recruitment page, our job announcement page, we do it a little bit differently. We make a proposition, which is, think about your dream organization and come help us build it. And we try to promote more of a feeling to draw people rather than sort of the static technical things. And when we look at job descriptions, we're always evolving it. What can we do different, better to attract new people, make it more accessible to those who feel like they can't get into our industry unless they have the experience. Many of our positions don't require bachelors because, again, life and work experience to me is invaluable in doing a job and doing it well. So we've already started doing things like that. And once we have all these different partners to help us, I mean, we're talking about, partners from veterans to battered women's shelter, to those people who work with people that are trying to come back into society after serving time, at least talking with all these people, trade organization, labor unions, and to see what makes sense in our service area, but also what makes sense within the industry, and working with a variety of associations on DI task force to learn from others' experience and successes to how we can sort of parse that out, because every area is a little bit different with their politics and their demographics. So we want to do something immediately and recognizing that, again, we don't have time to wait. So what can we do now? And then what can we do more of a longer term? And then once we get employees into the organization, we customize the leadership training in-house to really instill the values of our organization. We call our guiding value hero, honesty, effort, respect, one team. And part of that is to talk about the importance of respecting diversity, but not just respecting it, but seeking it out. It's not enough that you sit at the table. You have to prepare a table that invites people. And so this is a very active, accountable way of approaching the issue of diversity. So it's not just something that we make plans and develop committees. We hold ourselves accountable, and that's part of our performance appraisal of what have we done to help not just coworkers within the organization, but our customers. What have you done to make an impact on the lives of those around us, to better our industry, to better our profession, to better our organization, to better our community? So when you kind of start from the very beginning as part of the employee orientation, you get the training. We have a special training for supervisors. We have special training for all the employees. Then you reinforce that through incentives, but you also hold them accountable. I find that it kind of is sort of the bookend approach of really making sure that everyone on a regular basis understand the value and the importance of it. On the external again, working with a lot of different organizations and associations to talk about what can we do as an industry. But I think it's also important to recognize that as an industry that we need some data. I think at the very beginning, we don't have statewide data about this issue in our industry. And I think that's really important because you'll hear some people say, well, yeah, we have diversity. We have a lot of, so-and-so in our agency. But I think what we're talking about here is diversity in leadership that is going to have a bigger impact. It's not enough that you just have the head counts and the percentages. I think it's where that diversity exists, because practical matter is within an organization, or to affect change to some level, you got to have the authority, which comes with the position. So it's not enough that we get diversity into the organization. The next hurdle is one that we need to clear very quickly is how do we advance them to the leadership roles and really make them leaders in our industry. And that's the kind of conversation that I'm very interested in, because I think with over almost 3,000 water providers in the state of California, when you look at the general manager, CEO, the top level staff position, you're not going to see a lot of diversity. And we need to change that very conscientiously, very intentionally, and talk about what is keeping us from doing that. I was talking about the other day about even GM evaluations, how people and boards and councils select their leadership. What is a job description? We kind of all have the executive recruiter, the nice flyers, and then, every job description, values and traits. But what are we really looking for if we are truly trying to transform and evolve ourselves? So to me, it's sort of beginning at the very start to say, are we getting the right people to advance this issue? Because if you are not, if it's just people who can talk the talk but not do the walk, then we'll continue to be in this vicious cycle of saying, gosh, I wonder why our industry looks the way it does. And I think that kind of very sort of heartfelt, candid conversations need to be happening so that we can truly make an impact and make it soon.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, bringing a lot of topics to the table here. But Jose Martinez, I'd like to give you an opportunity too.
Yeah, thanks. One of the disadvantages, I think, at the end is everybody's already taken my talking points, but I'll be able to build, right? And that's what this is for, right? To build on it. So I thought of two things. So one of them is partnerships. So we're a retail agency. We don't have a huge staff. We're smaller to medium size compared to some of these others. So one of the things we've done is we partner with other retail agencies. So when we talk about a talent pool, the people that we're looking for to come recruit, to work here, don't just come within our own district boundaries, right? They're going to come from adjacent agencies or from the whole region. So one example is we've partnered with another retail agency and actually an educational elementary school district, and we've created a hydro station that promotes these careers in water. The diversity piece is, this is a public school, right? This is public education. The students there look because they are members of the community. That's who we want to recruit, right? And so we want to get that and get these careers from a diverse group to get them interested even early on so that they keep this in mind. So that's one. Another partnership is even our community college. Again, they make up and they represent the students and the people in our community. So that's one partnership. Another one is because we are a smaller or a medium-sized retail agency, we've had the benefit of our regional wholesaler, the San Diego County Water Authority, has created a workforce development group. And so we're able to pool resources, and we're proud to be an active member, and I'm on that work group, to be able to pull our resources and say, okay, how do we target workforce development? What educational institutions do we go? We've included, there's a big discussion on veterans. That's obviously near and dear to my heart, which I think is its own very diverse talent pool by itself, by its nature. But, again, those kind of partnerships, and that's what we've done to try to go out and reach the whole region, right? And so we all benefit from that, even other retail agencies that may not be as active in it. So I think that's a great bang for the buck. And another thing to build, and I believe it was Secretary Crowfoot that talked about it earlier, is targeting communication. So it's beyond just postings. It's when we want to talk about the drought, when we want to talk about whatever topic, we don't just get it out there. We target chambers of commerce, specifically a Hispanic chamber of commerce. We target these groups Because just by getting out there, I mean, here's the reality. My board early on when I got elected said, hey, you should be an example out there. So we want to have the general manager, you know, Jose Martinez, who lives in this area, go out there and talk about things, because someone out there, there's going to be an engineer, there's going to be someone out there that says, oh, wow, look, this person's talking about these important issues. You know, no mention of racial or diversity issues, but them seeing that says, wow, we have a place at the table in a leadership position. So it's important to get out there and get these messages. At the beginning of COVID, there were concerns about water quality or bottled water. So again, the regional wholesaler put out a communication campaign. And one of the things was I was on a talk show in Spanish, and we were talking about water quality and how safe it is to tap. So I'm there speaking in Spanish to this group. So those are the kind of things that I think are very targeted kind of communications for our industry and how we outreach and show these opportunities to, like what June had said, which is have leaders out there be on the forefront so that they can see that as an example. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And, you know, in thinking about kind of pulling in all the points, we're talking about leadership, we're talking about diversity and so many different levels. We're talking about, you know, gender equity, and we're talking about having different perspectives and our racial and ethnic diversity as well. And speaking of, you know, the pandemic, and what that has done is cause a lot of people to rethink their, you know, their employment choices and where they are. And as a water industry, we're competing for a workforce as well. So, you know, on one hand, we want to get the kids and get them interested in a career in water, but we also have to understand that there's a, you know, movement happening, you know, at all levels. So we may need to fill executive positions. We need to fill supervisory positions and staff positions. And we're going to be drawing from different generations and different populations as well. And we want, what do we need to do to kind of make our industry attractive and welcoming? So I kind of want to shift that into our next question, is when we think about the state of our infrastructure, and in the context of the focus we've had on being able to fund our physical and our human infrastructure, we also discuss the risks that come from inadequate funding. Given that this is Water Professional Appreciation Week, when we think about the value of our workforce, what are the risks to inaction around the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion? What are our risks so that we can start thinking about how to mitigate those? And I'm going to shift back, Jose, to give you an opportunity, and I'm going to go around that way.
Well, I think the risk is, again, what I had started with, which is I won't have that diverse, large talent pool to pick from if we don't do it. And I think it was Jasmine that said it earlier, is we can't wait. It's time is now. I mean, I can tell you we have vacancies, we have a critical need for positions to fill, and we need to do that now. And that's to make sure we keep our infrastructure ready to go. We pass on, you know, the knowledge, we continue to build on that to continue to handle whatever challenges that we may have here in the future. I think another risk is, again, someone else brought it up, which is, you know, we're going to have to go, and the challenges we have, whether it's drought, whether it's increased cost, affordability, getting water to underserved, disadvantaged communities, you know, that the reality is that takes money and resources. And so you're going to go out there and you have to ask the public to trust you with those funds. And I think the communities you ask are going to have more faith and confidence when the people asking them come from their communities. I mean, that's the reality. So that's where I think why it's important for us to do this and do this now. And we should have done it earlier. That's the reality.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Jim Lopez, when we're talking about what risks to inaction.
I think there's a lot. I'll just touch upon a couple. In order for us to function, you know, as Jose mentioned, we have to have the trust of our customers, our community, because many of us rely on rates. We also need funding from state and federal. In order to do that, we have to appeal to what is compelling for those who make decisions about where the money goes. So I'll start with the customer support. Jose's example, when he goes out to the community and he's talking in Spanish, people just think he's a rock star. Like, I mean, it becomes their feeling, how they feel about his organization, because they can personally identify. It's like walking into a room where no one looks like you, like Rick said. You feel distant immediately. And with that distance comes a little bit of distrust. But yet when people look at someone, they can identify and they can make that connection right away. It's really helpful. And then now they start talking and they're engaged. They're listening with a different kind of connection. And as an agency, if we're serving the public, because we're not just dealing with pipes, if we're serving the public and the social demands and the public expectations are growing, I need to be able to understand what they're thinking. I need to be able to anticipate what they need and what they want. And if I don't have that in my workforce, I'm lost. I have to wait for them to tell me or get mad at me and feel so strongly about something. Now they have to come and yell at me of what they want. As opposed to if I have people within the organization that understands the demographics of the people and the needs of the community that I serve, I'm ahead of the game and I can anticipate. So I think that's really valuable for public agency to be able to establish relevancy in your workforce. Because if you are irrelevant in our business, you can't be successful and you won't be around a long time, because people start to ask, who are you? What are you about? And that growing distrust, especially in this environment in our society, where there's this collective and individual anxiety, it's like a big tinderbox. Anything can just set it off. Not having that relationship through connectivity can be very detrimental when we need it. The second part, which is getting the outside world to be able to relate to us. You know, the funds are very competitive. And if we don't have partners, a very diverse partners, linking arms, then we become a very, very quiet voice, because the world around us, if you look, we're behind. And I would say in California, we're particularly behind, because I think in this virtual space, we participate in a lot of these international and national conversations. And you talk about some of the initiative and some of the things that are taking place, whether it's diversity or innovation. And I think we have some ground to make up. And if we don't partner with diverse partners, then we are not as strong as we can be. And I'll just give you an example. You know, when all these funds came out for COVID initially, a lot more money went to energy and other sectors. You know, homeless and COVID were top two priorities we kept hearing. But homeless and COVID, these are also water issues. Water is integrated into everything, but we don't know how to tell that story because we don't have that connectivity all the time. And that's why diversity isn't just about gender and race. It is about perspective of opening our doors to the entire world and saying, come help us, because we need the help. And I think for a while, our industry has done so well that we become a little confident, at the risk of being a little complacent, that we've always done it this way. We're okay. I don't need someone from, you know, this different sector to tell me what to do, because I've done it and I've done it fine. And I think in this age, we have to be much more open-minded and bring those perspectives so that we could be relevant and successful.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. We're also getting questions coming in on the Q&A panel, so I really appreciate that, and we'll weave those in as we can. I also want to give people an opportunity, our panelists an opportunity to share resources they would recommend. So for someone who's, you know, kind of, when I say someone, we have someone as a leadership in their organization and maybe someone as an individual. But if you're in an organization who's really looking to address these concerns that have been raised here, we've talked about our challenges, we talked about the risks. Can you talk about, when you and your organization were at those beginning stages, what resources you would recommend? And, you know, feel free to also answer the previous question about the risk. But I think if we want to really point people to, you know, what can they do? And Rick, calendar, I'll go to you next.
All right. Well, I'm going to look forward. I think June and Jose did such a wonderful response to the last question, talking about what are the risks. I don't personally have anything to add to it. I think it was very eloquently spoken to, but I am going to talk to one of the toolkits I saw in the chat. How are we addressing the issue of LGBTQ? I also saw in the chat of, how are we addressing other issues in terms of sustainability. So often when you're looking at, when I'm talking about racial equity, diversity, inclusion, it also included everything. When we were talking about, in our agency, talking about diversity and inclusion, yes, it looked at everything, but race was all often ignored. One of the things I sit on a board called the California Urban Water California Urban Water Agencies. It's called CWEA. One of the things that I did is I said, well, we're talking about pipelines, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about things that are always important to the industry, but let's talk about things that are also important to me in the industry, which was diversity and inclusion. And so we created a new diversity and inclusion task force, which I'm actually one of the co-chairs of. And then when I said, one of the best things we can do, because often people will say, how do I start? How do I move forward? What should we be doing? So what we put up was a diversity and inclusion toolkit that addresses exactly what you can do in your agency to get started. And I saw that was just put into the chat. I really encourage you to look at this and to look at this toolkit, to understand what you need to do in order to move forward. So when you talk about how do you address the LGBTQ issues, well, does your agency have employee resource groups, and are they broad enough to make sure it blends in all the perspectives of your employee resource groups? But if you go to that racial equity diversity toolkit, it'll tell you how to get started, the things that you need, the best practices that we saw at other agencies, which included, one of the first things that I did was not only getting buy-in from the executive, but the executives below me, but also from the board of directors. So I would encourage folks to look at that. I'd encourage them to utilize it. And I think all it can do is make their agency stronger as they try to implement what's in that toolkit.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Jasmine Hall, in terms of, what advice would you give to others who are really looking to advance the practices within their organization?
And I want to add to just a couple of risks as to the lack of trust from the public and the lack of ability to the staff to continue the operations. And so if the applicants and the staff feels that IEUA isn't in a place where they want to be, that we run the risk of them going elsewhere. And so we want to make sure that we have that environment, and we seek inside our internal leadership to get a buy-in, to integrate that within the organization and the culture and within our policies and practices. We need to also make a commitment to JEDCI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, as the performance metric in the appraisal phases, and build a psychological safe space for all employees to discuss and share their ideas. So I think those are some of the things we really need to focus on with internal organizations as first, and then start looking out, because the ones that are there, we want to keep them. And then build, when we bring in new employees, we want that culture to be there so that they feel respected, they feel appreciated, and they will be engaged and not be felt like the culture doesn't lend them the opportunity to add value. So that's it for me. Thanks.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's so important for people. It's really expensive to replace an employee, isn't it? You've invested to train and bring them on board and start building within them some institutional knowledge about your practices, your operations. You talked about the culture of the organization. And if they feel uncomfortable, you lose that talent and you've got to start fresh again. And that's a lot of time lost. Secretary Crowfoot, I'd also like to kind of ask you, one of the questions in the chat talks about environmental justice. And when we talk about water as a resource, you can't separate the two. How would you speak to that? And how are we bringing in those conversations around our water? And then if you can then go into what gives you hope for our future here.
Yeah, thanks. Great question you asked, Felicia, and I'll connect it to a question that you asked, before. Look, let's be honest. we have fundamental inequity on water in California. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. We have dizzying wealth across our state, and we have upwards of 1 million Californians that live in homes that can't turn on the tap and have reliable, clean, and safe water. And that's on all of us. I think we could talk about the fact that there's several thousand water agencies, and that some of these water agencies, you know, most of these water agencies do a tremendous job providing clean and safe water. But we all collectively live in a state with that level of iniquity. I also think probably most every water agency in the state serves a set of marginalized people that have trouble actually making their water bills, and that would be in danger of shutoff and may have been protected by the rules that got put in place during COVID. So I think we all have to recognize that there's work to do across our state and our own communities, and just be honest about that. And connecting this to the last question around, well, I think, you know, the power of diversity is better decision-making, as Jose said. I'll be completely candid and honest. I didn't realize that the drinking water crisis was at the scale it was when I worked for the last governor, and I was a point person on this. And some advocacy groups would come to me and talk about this, and I thought it was a really peripheral problem. And it wasn't until I had a colleague who was a Latina colleague who had been working in farm worker communities that sat me down and said, you need to understand this. This is a huge problem, much bigger than anyone in Sacramento acknowledges this, and this is what it looks like. And as it was a result of her background and her lived experience and her connection to those communities that elevated the issue in our office and helped understand the importance of the issue. I could tell a similar story as it relates to folks that can't pay their water bills and are in danger of getting their water bills cut off. That's where diversity matters. The person that I had a colleague that had the lived experience, that had a background that was different than mine. And boy, if I didn't have the benefit of her as a colleague, I would have continued to have a tremendous blind spot on an issue of fundamental inequity. So bringing folks in that understand these communities, that are trusted by marginalized communities to be shared those problems, that can then lift them up in these, you know, corridors of power within agencies, there's no substitute.
I really appreciate that. We don't know what we don't know, those blind spots. And so that's where this benefit, we really want to bring everyone to the table to really help us look at the big picture and have those inputs, because we need solutions that will work across the board. I'd like to give others an opportunity to you know, offer their insights on what gives them hope for where we're going. Jasmine.
Let's see. The fact that we are having these discussions right now about the industry is one. And the opportunity that the Inland Empire has developed with JVS to bring IE Works into the Inland Empire region. We're going to be working with the colleges and community leaders, just everyone that we can bring to the table to engage them, to help us find these generations of individuals to participate and learn about water. We have opportunities to share with them the facilities and the type of work that they can be engaged in, and the jobs pay well. So it gives me hope that we're on the right track. We're just behind a bit, but I think these type of discussions that continue we're having will help benefit overall.
Thank you so much. Jose, what gives you hope?
Well, what gives me hope is when I got out of the military about 15 years ago, and I got into the water sector, and if you got into a room of a lot of senior managers, that room looked different back then. You know, it was a step back. And what gives me hope is it looks a lot different, you know, 15 years later. We're not there yet. I think we need to continue to progress, but I can tell you, I'm very fortunate here. I've been working at OTI now for 10 years. And when you walk around the halls, when we have management meetings, it does look like the community we serve. And so I think what Secretary Crowfoot said is we are now having those people in those discussions when we tackle these topics, and we are starting to bring that discussion up to higher levels. Even with our board. I'm a relatively new general manager, and I'm very positively encouraged that these are very open and honest conversations and initiatives we have with our board, with the public. It's not something you do off to the side in closed session. We need to do this, and it's being mindful of it. So I am very hopeful and optimistic when it comes to that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Rick Callender, what gives you hope?
Well, kind of building off of what Jasmine was saying, what gives me hope is that we're actually having these conversations and able to have these conversations in a way which I believe is much more productive than in the past. If you look at how these conversations were had in the past, people, one, didn't have them because it felt too controversial, or two, they didn't want to have it because they felt if one group has been given a leg up for equality, then another group is going to be potentially losing. And that's how the conversation has been for so long. People looked at it as it was well, they're going to get an opportunity, so there's going to be less seats for me at the table. No, what we're saying is we're filling the table completely, so if there's seats for everyone now at the table. So this is where we share common cause. We can all win together. So I'm happy to be having the conversation. I'm happy that we'll be able to advance with everyone at the table rather than saying, well, let's keep them to the side and act like we didn't know her. They were at the side, even though they've been screaming for so long. They've been banging on pots and pans and they've been yelling. But these issues are real. So I'm happy that we're able to see it. I appreciate Secretary Crow for even talking about being in different administrations and seeing it through different eyes, because the eyes of equity are really the eyes of justice. And so for me, this is excellent to be having these conversations, and I think we're going to be a better society because of it.
Thank you so much. June Lopez, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is people like Nimala Benin from Department of Water Resource, who is behind the scenes. So you don't see her face on this panel, but she's the face and the kind of voice that I really admire that should be. And when I talk about people at the leadership level, a lot of times our staff work behind the scenes. We're visible ones because of our title, but they're the ones who teach us, the ones who push us. People like her, she could just do her job and just do just fine, but they go the extra mile. They have a passion, they have a purpose, they have this desire to help, and they will use their nighttime hours when they're traveling, because this is a heart calling. It's not just work for them. So people like that make change. People like that make us change faster and better than we should. And seeing people like her out there grabbing people and saying, we need to do this, having the courage to voice when something is not exactly right, saying this is what we should do, and knowing that sometimes it's not popular, but doing it because it's the right thing to do. That kind of courage is what gives me hope.
Thank you so much. That's so very important. And that's great, because I want to thank everyone for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for putting yourselves out there for us to learn from. This is, as was said earlier, we really need to be learning and acting and understanding that this is a topic that we make ourselves vulnerable when we put ourselves out here for this. So I really want to acknowledge what that means and to thank everyone. This has been a fantastic discussion. We've got some good comments in the chat, as well as some good questions coming in. I'm going to go back through, look at those questions to see if there's anything we've missed and go on. But with that, again, thank you to all of our participants who've been on the call. This is being recorded, so if you weren't able to sit in for the whole thing, you'll have an opportunity to go back and listen to it.